Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am your host, Jon Gray, and today we're going to talk about how nonprofit leaders are using software and data to solve some of our most pressing social problems. So today I'm joined with CEO and founder at Tech Matters, as well as author of Tech for Good, Jim Fruchterman. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Looking forward to chatting.
Definitely. Well, Jim, for those who have yet to meet you, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and some of the work that you're doing over at Tech Matters?
Sure. So my background is that, I'm an electrical engineer and, software entrepreneur. I started 7 companies in Silicon Valley and only 5 failed. The 2 that succeeded were both
Nice.
early AI companies, at least what was
Uh-huh.
then at the leading edge. And when my investors vetoed a project that could help people with disabilities, I went ahead and started a nonprofit to do it anyway. Because frankly, the market to help blind people wasn't big enough to get my venture capitalists excited. But I told my wife I'd do it for 1 year, and that was more than 35 years ago. So I just have loved using technology and social good and moved away from trying to make money.
Yeah. No, that's really unique and interesting. So when you say kind of moving away from making money and kind of using tech for good, what does that really mean to you, and what is a nonprofit leader?
Well, the issue that I run into is that 90% of humanity and the planet are generally not good markets for traditional for-profit companies, the ones that are backed by venture capital, the ones that are raising hundreds of billions of dollars to build giant AI
Uh-huh.
infrastructure. So that when you say, "Hey, you want to help people in Zambia?" Their answer is not really. And so that market failure is what got me excited. And as a for-profit Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur, I realized that we just had to do something differently. And so that's why I went into the nonprofit sector. And developers might be most aware of sort of open source foundations, which are almost all organized as nonprofits. They're more industry associations than traditional charities that hand out blankets or something like that. But it's that structure where the primary goal is to advance a social objective rather than to get rich, rather than try to make your shareholders a lot of money. So we don't have
Hmm.
shareholders. I mean, actually, in a lot of ways, the American taxpayer is our shareholder, and our job is to
Nice.
use our time and whatever charitable money we can raise to advance the interests of society in general, as opposed to ourselves in particular.
Now, you mentioned open source, and that's a term that resonates really well with our audience, especially us here at FreeSWITCH. Where do you kind of value open source and kind of the social good that does come from there? Do you have any examples of how you've implemented some of these?
Absolutely. Well, I think our first open source project was our human rights, uh, basically witness and defender technology. So we made a crypto-enabled data collector for people who are interviewing witnesses or survivors of human rights abuses. And so we chose to use open source for that project mainly for transparency reasons, right? Human rights defenders have a
Mhm.
lot of reason to not trust the technology they're using, and being open source made it more trustworthy. And so we see the application of open source and social good to be really important. And it's not the traditional open source thing. We don't have a big community of devs out there because our community is poor people and the nonprofits that serve them, and by and large they don't
Yeah.
have developers, right? But the idea of transparency, shared ownership, uh, disaster recovery. If our nonprofit goes out of business, you've got the source. You could hire a dev and continue to maintain it because
Yep.
we kind of do standard things. And so it's we really value that, and we think that the currency of the nonprofit sector is trust. And I think that open source makes a big contribution to generating trust.
Hmm.
So just some examples. So obviously the human rights software, environmental project management software, software to help disabled people read. Um, we run software for national child helplines in 20 countries, and that's open source on top of standard tech platforms like Amazon and Okta and Twilio. But everything that we do is open source. And one example of something we did, we ran into a problem where basically voice over IP, voice over the internet,
Hmm.
didn't work in Zambia and Zimbabwe. the performance was just lousy because data connections just weren't that good. So
Yeah.
we went out and said, hey, let's put a magic box to keep all the voice traffic inside the country. So, where the performance was good, and send all the metadata over the internet. And so we used FreeSWITCH and, what we call our Salo connector. And now, voice is working great in Zambia. And that was, we had a volunteer, say, hey, I think I can make this work on, FreeSWITCH. And then within 6 months, we had a working prototype, and then we productized it. And now we're trying to deploy it in Zimbabwe.
Very neat. Very cool. What kind of implementations do those kind of look like? Are they more business centered, or is it private, or what kind of like communication sides were you kind of building?
We end up doing everything because our users need a lot of different things. So in the case of, building, call center software and bringing texting to traditional telephone helplines, that's a business to business, a B2B kind of thing where we're talking to our customer who's, a 30-person nonprofit running the national helpline with counselors. But we also write software for farmers and ranchers, and we're building an app that's on, Google Play Store or the Apple Store, so they can use that to identify their soil. So it's like whatever's right.
So, Jim, I recently saw that you have released a book. I would love to hear more about the journey, inspiration, and kind of how you came about this, as well as what content you're wishing to share with the world.
Well, I announced to the world that I was going to write a book almost 20 years ago, because I got a MacArthur Fellowship, and people were like, "What are you going to do?" I'm like, "I'm going to write a book," and that was 19 years ago. And so,
Yeah.
I made multiple failed attempts at writing a book. I first was going to do an autobiography, and Wendy Kopp of Teach for America said, "No, my second book, which was more of a field book, worked better than my autobiography." And I went, "Okay." So what I decided to do is I'm often the only tech guy or certainly Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur that nonprofit leaders know. And I'm giving advice every week. We call it my karma consulting practice because it's free. And I thought,
Uh-huh.
hey, rather than answering the same questions over and over again, why don't I write a book and say, hey, if you want to know how to raise money, or why you should do open source or open licensing, or, how you actually could start a nonprofit tech enterprise, hey, read the book, and then we'll have a much better conversation. And the other
Uh-huh.
part of it was, when I started this nonprofit a long time ago, I was the only nonprofit tech company I knew for 10 years. I felt very lonely. And
Oh yeah.
starting in the 2000s, people like Jeff Skoll, the first president of eBay, said, "Oh, you're a social entrepreneur, and let's give you some money." I went, "Oh, this is great." But now I know hundreds of tech for good nonprofits, and people don't know that they exist, right? So
Mm-hmm.
part of the goal of the book was to talk up. Now there's more than 60 tech for good nonprofits in my book from all over the world, mostly not from the US, using technology to help farmers, help mental health, help, education. I mean, just all sorts of applications. And I wanted to share those stories so that when the next person says, hey, I got this great idea, it's going to help society, but it doesn't make enough money, I guess that means I should quit. My answer is no, no, no. If you really care about helping society, consider starting a tech for good nonprofit. And here's the way to do it. I believe my book is the first book that talks about how to not make money with a tech company startup as opposed to how to get rich.
Jim, my next question is, how do you convince people to stop thinking about money and more thinking about the social good? Like how do you put value kind of onto that? And how have you been able to convince so many people in order to make this shift?
It's easier than you think. It just takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't have to change everyone in the tech industry. I just have to change the minds of, 0.001% of the tech industry about coming to work for a tech for good nonprofit. So I and my peers don't pay as well as Google or Meta. But there are plenty of people who want to move from money to meaning and have that opportunity at every stage in their career, right? So when we put out a full stack engineer job, or a UX designer, it's not hard for us to find people who are motivated, socially, and probably the better paid they are, the bigger the pay cut they're coming to join us. And the other thing, and this is, to sort of the open source thing, is that, we're generalists. We generally don't know very much about the field that we're, the social sector field. We're not an expert in child psychology, but those are our customers. But when we need advice on security, I mean, we'll be able to call up someone great at Okta and get help around security, right? So and the same thing has just been true. We had promised to maintain a 10-year-old legacy app, written in a language that we didn't know. It broke, and we put out a call saying, who's going to help us? And 10 different groups stepped forward from all over the world, and we were able to, get that legacy app back up and running. So because the story that we can tell, and that is what we pay people with. Yes, some people are making a living, just not, not as much as they could if they were maximizing, but we pay them in the stories of social impact, right? That's why our team is there, is they want to hear about the truckload of Zambian kids who were rescued because a kid got away and called the magic number, and and they were liberated. That we were doing a soil ID app. We just found out that someone translated it into Ukrainian, thanks God for open source, and is using it to start identifying soils that need remediation from being contaminated with explosives because of the war there. So this is what makes the job fun. It's what's kept me doing this for more than 35 years.
No, that's wealth in immeasurable ways, rather than having money, you can't put a price or a number basically on that feeling of being able to do work like that. So I think that's really convincing and inspiring, at least. Well, Jim, what else have I yet to ask you, or is there anything else besides the book, especially the book, that you would like to give a shout out or a plug about?
Well, one thing I want to mention is that the book's going to go open access, Creative Commons license 1 year after publication. So late next year, it'll be available freely globally. So I think that's important. It would have been very off-brand as an open source kind of guy to have a book that was going to be proprietary forever. But MIT Press was quite willing, for a 1 year embargo to make that deal with me. And and the real goal of the book is just to inspire technologists all over the world that when they have a great idea for how technology can help solve a social problem, and then they figure out, well, it's not really going to be a business, that they don't stop there, that they actually go, wait a minute, I could start this as a charity. I could work with a charity that has this problem, and I could actually see my tech skills actually do something that helps the people who need technology the most and are likely to be the least able to afford it. So that's my dream, is a lot more tech for good, because the world's problems are going up, the money going into the social sector is going down, and the only way I know to do a lot more with less is technology, and there's a lot of opportunities to do that in the social good sector.
No, we greatly appreciate you sharing that mentality and kind of the new mindset that I think that we'll all be able to adopt, and making the world a better place by using our brains, our technology, and the data that we have around us. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining today.
Definitely, John. Glad to do it.